you are, your name, your position, whatever that makes you, and et cetera, that makes you a professional in this field?
Sure. My name is Nina Jankowicz, and I am the Disinformation Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. And I've studied Russia and its disinformation tactics over the past several years, including advising the Ukrainian government on strategic communications.
Thank you. And for my first question, as I'm going to start with, is what is disinformation?
So disinformation is the use of misleading or false information with a malign intent. That's different than misinformation, which is when false or misleading information is shared, but the person who's sharing it doesn't necessarily have that intent behind it. So it might be your aunt or uncle who's sharing a conspiracy theory, but they don't actually know that it's not true. That's misinformation. Whereas when a state actor or a political group or a politician knowingly shares false information with that bad intent, that's disinformation.
Thank you. And for my second question is disinformation propaganda?
So there's a little bit of a difference between disinformation and what we might think of as propaganda. Propaganda usually works to support some sort of state or government goal, usually with one worldview in mind. But when we're looking at the state-sponsored disinformation, or even some of the disinformation we see in politics here today, sometimes, and in fact most of the time, that's used to just divide people. So it doesn't always have one political goal in mind, particularly when we're speaking about actors like Russia. They will use all sorts of different narratives on the left, right, and center in order to split apart the American population or whatever country that they're working in. So it's a little bit different than the propaganda that we think about from communist times when, for instance, the Soviet Union was always pushing the Soviet line of thinking. Different than that.
Okay. Okay, my third question is, how are memes being used for disinformation in political discourse?
So I think memes are used in order to drive home an emotional and kind of sticky topic in a way that people can consume very quickly and like with bite-sized information. So rather than reading an entire article, which people these days don't have a lot of time, don't really want to read, they might want to watch a video or something instead. But even so, the best way to reach people is with a little bit of text on top of a picture that is something funny or that makes them mad or really happy, something that will stick in their minds that's emotional, because all of the best disinformation operates on emotion. And then that can get shared around and go viral and reach a lot of people and be extremely engaging. And that's why I think memes are the preferred medium that many people use for disinformation.
Fourth question, how are those on the right able to spread disinformation more effectively than the left? I understand with that question, that one might be biased, but over my experience of being on the internet for a lot of times, like groups like 4chan, on like Reddit, all of those, it's always like the people who like lean right, they normally have like better memes, not even better, but they're able to lie more effectively in theirs. I just want to give more explanation about that question.
I think it froze a little bit. I'm not.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if that was me.
Frozen right now.
I can stop the recording and then we can start again to get it to. That might can help it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let me chat to you and see if you can hear me. Mm-hmm.
How do I get this to lower? So, oh, okay, I see it. Fourth question was.
Great. So we have the question about the right and the left, and I know where you were going with that, and I tend to agree. So and I think there is research that shows that people on the right actually do tend to spread disinformation or engage with disinformation a bit more than people on the left. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I haven't done the research into this myself, and I would encourage you to check out a few of those papers of some people who have looked at this stuff. But I think in general, voters and people who are into politics on the right tend to be a little bit older, so perhaps not as media literate as those who are on the left. And in general, the themes that the right has found galvanizing lately that have really driven people to participate in politics are these very emotional hot button issues to do with race, for instance, to do with things that people really care a lot about, abortion, LGBT rights, all of these sorts of things. And the people who want to engage with those issues tend to be a bit more likely to buy into those narratives. And part of that, I think, is a little bit because we've lost our local media as a result of the influence of social media and the increase in people using it as their main source of information. And I think without that lens that people can interpret events from, so like that local lens that allows them to really understand the issues that are happening around the country in their own terms. Without that local lens, they're unable to process that and looking for alternative sources of information. And that's why they happen upon disinformation. Sure. So yeah, a dog whistle. A dog whistle is essentially a tactic where, without being outwardly, for instance, racist, a person online will use words that mean something to a certain group, but not everyone else. So a good example of that in textual form was a couple years ago when, in order to signify that someone was Jewish, anti-Semitic users would use parentheses around.
Did it freeze again? It froze again.
Oh, now it says, can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Okay, it's back now. Great. So the Jewish American community actually adopted those parentheses as like a signal of pride. So that's one example. And then your last question about, can disinformation radicalize an individual? I think there's certainly evidence that in combination with the way that social media works these days, where we are driven into algorithmic filter bubbles and people are in recommendation rabbit holes, for instance, on YouTube, where they view one piece of disinformation and then just get caught up in this and are unable to really figure out what's out of it. That's the sort that can radicalize someone when they're being fed that information over and over. I think it's a really problematic thing, and it's compounded by the way that social media works these days. And now it says connection lost again, so I hope you are still there. I'll type you. Now we're recording, great. Okay, basically what happens on social media, platforms like YouTube, people get stuck in a filter bubble, or they look at one conspiratorial video and that leads them to another and leads them to another. So I think it's a combination of not only the disinformation itself, but the way that social media operates that radicalizes people over time. And that's what's so problematic about our information environment right now. Great. Mm-hmm. Of course, happy to help.
So much.
Okay, good luck. Bye-bye. No, I can't hear you. I just see your mouth moving.
Dang, okay. Okay.
I can't hear you.
I'm gonna turn subtitles on. Okay, let me restart this.